might have the most underrated quarterbacks out of any conference in all of college football. And today we're going to dive into it and just give a preview over the ACC in general, but specifically talk about quarterback play. And today, just like last week, we have Taylor Mccard, the all-time greatest quarterback at Rice. And I'll continue to say it. He's modest. He won't say it, but I'll keep saying it. But we're going to dive into a lot of ACC talk today, and I'm really excited about it. But before we dive into it, Taylor, how you doing, dude? You excited for this ACC talk?
Good, man. Good. I mean, I know we're going to dig into it, but I think this has I think this really does have the potential to be maybe the best quarterback class for any conference in the country. And I think part of that's they got a couple of superstars at the top, but there's some guys in the middle and even towards what we would consider the bottom right now that this may have the most depth, including the SEC at the quarterback position. So I think this will be a fun one to dig into.
Absolutely. I think you're right. If several of these kind of underrated guys hit, then you could have 7 or 8 like solid dudes in this conference. So before we dive in, guys, I just want to encourage y'all to consider subscribing to the YouTube channel if you like any quarterback related content. As long as it's related to the quarterback position, it's fair game here. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So Taylor, I kind of grouped this into about 3 or 4 different kind of not scenarios, but different classifications of quarterback. Kind of like the SEC, we have your cream of the crop guys, the Sam Howell, DJU, and then of course Derek King. Then we have who I consider kind of a wild card in Phil Dracovic, even though I think you could say he's probably more cream of the crop than anything else. And then we have a bunch of underrated guys who some have a lot of playing time, some don't. But if they all hit, they could be really good. And then we got some quarterback competitions. But I want to dive into the cream of the crop first because I think we got Sam Howell and DJU, obviously NFL guys. Sam Howell may be the number 1 pick. And let's start with Sam Howell. Do you think what do you think? What do you see in his game? I know you've been able to watch him play, but what do you see in his game that has him to be one of the top quarterbacks, not just in the ACC, but in all of college football, and could be the number 1 guy drafted?
Yeah, I know I touched on it last week, and I'm going to do it again this week, but it was my chance to be around some of these guys. So I was down at the Manning camp, and Deems May played quarterback at North Carolina back in the 90s. He played in the NFL for a while. He calls North Carolina's games on the radio now. I asked him basically that question. I said, what do you think about it? What makes him so good? And he said, he's got all the tools, right? He's got plenty of talent, but he's unflappable. If he throws a pick, he's coming right out the next series and he's firing, and he's going to make up for that mistake. And just being around him, he and I only had a chance to visit briefly, but just watching him interact and watching him, his mannerisms, how he talks to people, you can tell he's just one of those kind of just a cool, calm, collected guy. And that resonates on the field too. I think that's part of why you go back to 2019, he gets thrown in the mix as a true freshman. And they go out and beat South Carolina week 1. And that's it's just taken off from there. I think when it's all said and done, he could be your Heisman winner. This could be a playoff caliber team. I think this is the first time that Clemson has had some real vulnerability in the past few years. And I think North Carolina, they're the kind of sexy name for a reason right now, because it's timed up well with, they finally have a quarterback that they can put toe to toe with whoever Clemson has. And they feel like they can go in there and beat them and run the table and be a playoff team this year. And I think it starts and ends with Sam Howell.
Absolutely. I think you hit on a lot of good points. And something I want to touch on is his ability to make others around him better, right? You can look at the numbers and look at everything. Yeah, they're big numbers, wow numbers, but he makes everyone around him better, and that just kind of gravitates to the whole field, whether it's offense, defense. And so it's definitely going to be interesting because you have, the cream of the crop has a lot of solid quarterbacks, but I think it's safe to say he is the cream of the crop. He is number 1. And you got the guys with DJU, who I think he could be the best quarterback in college football, if not this year, the next year. And then Derek King coming back from that injury, the ACL injury. What do you see in those 2 guys, and why do you think they're so talented? I know I'll just kind of throw with my thoughts on DJU real quick. And obviously you talk about the strong arm and everything, but I think it's his ability to fit balls into tight spaces and tight windows, and not just because of his arm, but I think he has a good anticipation factor, and I think he's able to get the ball out quick. And when you kind of combine that with his strong arm, he can make any throw on the field. It's one thing to say, oh, he makes any throw on the field, but really being able to describe why, I think is kind of an important thing. So I'll let you take it away, but I just wanted to throw that about DJU and then kind of jump into King after that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think for DJ, what's going to be really critical is last year, because Trevor Lawrence was out for a little bit, he got some really good experience. That comeback win against BC, that's huge. That's a huge feather in your cap as a true freshman. And then going up to Notre Dame, even in a loss, he got to experience about as hostile an environment. Saturday night, I believe they had College game day there for that game. that's about as big an environment as you're going to ever play in college, even in the Final Four. And they went toe to toe with what ultimately ended up being a pretty stout team in Notre Dame. So he's going to be prepared, and he's got all the physical tools. All the things I said about Sam Howell, well, the exact same. You could say the same thing for DJ. And I think there's a chance that he's up there at the end of the year, a Heisman finalist. They're in the Final Four again. I mean, the guy's got the measurables, he's got the intangibles. And we talked about it a little bit last week with Bama, and that there is just this system in place, and you sort of give Saban the benefit of the doubt at this point. I think Dabo, they haven't accomplished as much as Bama has, but they're not that far behind if you really think about it over the last 10 years and what they've accomplished as a program. So you sort of give them the benefit of the doubt too. I imagine DJ is going to live up to the hype and replace, is he going to beat Trevor Lawrence? Probably not. Maybe he becomes a number 1 overall pick. But he's got everything he needs around him and as a player.
Yeah, I'm with you. If he, like you said, I think he's going to be pretty close, if not just as good. But even if he's 90% what Trevor Lawrence is, that's a first-round pick, So that the last guy I want to talk about before we dive into Phil Jurkovec, because I got some stuff on him, is King. And there's been some good reports about him coming back from his knee injury, which is fantastic. We wish him the best. But he's a guy where if he comes back and he's exactly the same guy he was last year, Miami could potentially make it to the ACC championship. And they've got a real shot. I think it all comes down to King, though, and like how he makes others around him better. And were you able to watch him at all when he was at U of H? Did you call any of those games or –
Didn't call a game of his, but I was following them closely just for some of the radio stuff I do in Houston. And dynamic player, we know what he can do. He's an accurate passer. Even though he's not very big, he still is a pretty accurate downfield passer, which tends to be the knock when you have a shorter quarterback, just because it's harder to find those lanes. My question for him now is, and this is just a natural question after an injury, what does mobility look like after an ACL tear? How does he bounce back? In this day and age, you really don't know anymore. I mean, some guys bounce back and they don't really miss a step, and they're good to go, but you don't know until they get out there and they do it, and they got to test it, and they're under live fire again. I will say, from everything I had heard about him as a player at U of H, and the same resonates at Miami, his guys love him. His teammates love and care for him and know that he is a leader and takes care of them. And that's huge. And those are the people that you pull for. I imagine he's going to have a big season for them as well. And Miami, this is another team that it feels like has inched their way up the past few seasons. And now all of a sudden you look up and they've got quite a bit of depth. I mean, they've got a lot of guys that have played a lot of football. That's what they were missing for a long time, was, well, we've got too many freshmen and sophomores playing. Well, now those guys are juniors, seniors, and fifth-year guys that got that extra bonus COVID year. So he's got pieces around him now. It's just going to be a matter of how does he bounce back from that ACL tear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to see him. I think he'll have a good season. And before we jump to Phil Jurkovec, I'm going to do throw an audible and change this setting for everyone. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. So let's jump into Phil Jurkovec, because I think he's an interesting one, because he kind of busted on the scene last year, was a high recruit at Notre Dame and transferred to Boston College. And my takeaway from him is he kind of fit Boston College's system perfectly. They went from from being more of a run team to more of a passing team because of him. The biggest questions that I have about him are, one, can you be accurate against the big teams, the big games? And then two, the system that they have, does that kind of lead to potential a lower completion percentage, even if you are accurate? For example, only having 2-man routes, 3-man routes, where you're keeping maybe 2 or 3 guys blocking, you don't have the option of a check down arm option of kind of a shorter route. So I think if you can kind of keep his accuracy in those bigger games, for example, the game against Clemson and Notre Dame was under 50%. The game against Virginia Tech was 54%, which they lost. And so every game that they lost, his completion percentage was down, accuracy was down. Did a good job taking care of the football. He's an NFL guy. But if he can take the next step and do exactly what he did last year, but better, he can be in that cream of the crop. But I know we kind of texted about him before, so I'm interested to see kind of your takeaway and kind of your thoughts on his accuracy in general, and kind of he did much better against the lesser tier teams, and then against the top defenses struggled a bit.
Yeah, for whatever it's worth, and frankly, I don't think it's worth much. But down in Louisiana, he struggled throwing the football. The couple times that they had him in the showcase throwing, and Derek King was there, Sam Howell was there. That's where a lot of these guys were down there throwing the ball around. And he struggled, wasn't very accurate, had a few come off the side of his hand that looked kind of funky. Again, that doesn't mean anything. Could have been a bad day. Could have been throwing somebody else's football. He wasn't comfortable with it. I don't really put any stock in that. But I think you go back to struggles with inaccuracy, especially in the bigger moments. That was the issue with Kellen Mond at Texas A&M the whole time he was there. Better competition, that completion percentage went down. And you hit the nail on the head with their offense. This is not a gimme completion offense. This is not we hit bubble screens and we hit shovel passes and we hit quick game to get completion percentage up and get these quick completions. It's much more pro style. It's much more downfield, full route concepts, get it to your back on the check down. And for him to take the next step, you have to get to your number one, your number two, boom, get to your check down, because that's the offense that they run. And it's all going to run through him. He has the chance to be a superstar, same as the other guys we've mentioned to this point. But I think the difference for him compared to the others is he does not have the talent around him at BC that those others do. He's going to have to step up and bring some people with him.
Yeah, that's good, man. Yeah. Phil Dracovic, Boston College quarterback, looking for a big step forward next year. So now I think kind of the meat and potatoes of the convo, at least what I'm looking forward to, the more underrated guys, the guys that have stuff to prove. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of list the names I put in the actual list. And then I want you to pick two guys that kind of stick out and resonate to you, and then I'll do the same after you go through your two guys. So again, just this list is guys who are underrated, guys who have shown glimpses in the past or have had some years starting but have been up and down. But if all these guys can hit and have a good season, then this could be a really, really good quarterback conference. So let's go through them real quick. We got Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh, seems like he's been starting there for 5 or 6 years. I think he is a super senior. Malik Cunningham from Louisville, who's going to be his 3rd year starting. Sam Hartman from Wake Forest, who this is going to be like his 2.5-ish year starting with Jamie Newman there the past 2 years ago, who I like a lot. Bryn Armstrong from Virginia had a really good year last year. And then kind of the guys who didn't get a ton of playing time yet but had glimpses: Devin Leary from NC State, Braxton Burmeister from Virginia Tech. Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech is a guy who flashed here and there but had some turnover issues. But those are kind of the 6 or 7 guys I'll put in that category of underrated guys who maybe have played some, maybe haven't, but if they take the step forward, could be really good guys. So I want you just to pick 2 guys that you like or stick out to you from this list, then I'll do the same.
Yeah, I think the first I'll give you one of the ones that you mentioned, Sam Hartman at Wake Forest. I think he's got the potential to have a breakout season. I think he's got the intangibles, like some of what I saw out of him last year. He's not real dynamic. He doesn't move around real well, but he sliced and diced North Carolina. He had over 400 yards passing against North Carolina. He can make it happen. It's just about consistency for him. The other one, and you didn't mention him, I think we're going to talk about him later, but I'm going to put him in this category, is Mckenzie Milton.
Yeah.
Is he all the way back? We just don't know yet. From what I've heard, just from people that are around the Knowles program, he's running around and looks on, just watch him running around, watch him at practice, looks to be back. Looks like his knee is back. He's fully healthy, ready to go. He was an unbelievable player at UCF before he went down. If he's, close to what he was there, I think he can be one of the top quarterbacks in the ACC. He's got that kind of talent. And again, Florida State's a program that they're always going to have guys. It's just a matter of, if you have the quarterback position humming as well, it brings everybody with them, and they're always going to have dudes, right? So he's one that, and selfishly, just as a fan of the sport, I want him to be back because everybody loves that guy. And that was such a freak injury. And you just hope that, I talked to Dylan Gabriel about him when I was down there. I was like, what's your relationship with him like? And he was like, man, he's like just one of the best guys. He's somebody that you pull for, and I hope that he comes back and that this season is would be back to his form from when he was at UCF. So I'm pulling big time for him, and not just pulling for him. I think he's got as much or more talent than everybody except for maybe DJ and Sam Howell. I think are kind of a class ahead of him. But then I would put him right there if he's healthy and playing like he was at UCF.
Absolutely. Let's stick with Milton just for a little bit. That's a great point I want to talk about, because I'm right there with you as just a fan of college football and just being a kind of a shorter quarterback myself, under stature. Like, you just naturally root for those guys and tough as nails. And so I think you're right. If he's able to just be back and be able to play with the talent he has around him. He's got more talented guys at Florida State than he had at UCF, even though UCF had some dudes he was throwing to. But he's got even more talent around him. So you only hope that could potentially continue to elevate his game. But it's just a somewhat of a different style too with Mike Norvell. So maybe he won't be asked to run around as much, stay in the pocket, quick stuff. What I would expect, and I want you to touch on this too, because you saw a lot more bullets in college than I did. But how hard is it, being gone 2 years, 2+ years, coming back from that knee injury? I don't even think, let's just take away the fact, let's just pretend like he's not even thinking about his knee. Like, he's clear, he's ready to rock and roll. That's a whole different issue. Like, let's just say he doesn't even think about it, but it's just the speed of the game, because he's going up against faster guys day in and day out. Right now, I think it's going to make him better, but just if you want to just touch on this being out of football for a little while, and now you're going back into probably the toughest position in all sports. Just what's that transition looking like? Could it take a few games? I think it's fair to give him a few games to get kind of rocking and rolling. If I'm an FSU fan, I wouldn't expect him to come out like UCF Milton at the beginning, but I think by the end it could definitely happen. So just want to get your take on that.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, I wasn't as good as Mackenzie Milton is, so he's going to bounce back probably quicker. I had one season where I missed 4 or 5 games and then came back from an injury. Mackenzie Milton has been around football for that time, right? He's been doing rehab, but for the past 2 years, he's still been around the game. He's still learning through osmosis, even if he wasn't actually on the field. I imagine a guy with his amount of talent and that is as motivated as he probably is to get back on the field and prove himself, I would imagine it doesn't take him very long to get back and get it rolling. I would give him maybe a game or two. He's such a talent. When you're that talented, sure, you get live bullets in front of you, and he's gonna have to figure out, okay, I really got to test this knee now. I think to me, that's same for De'Aaron King. That's the biggest. It's the most critical, because most critical step, because your mind will tell you one thing, and if your body it's not there yet, then you start thinking about an injury while you're playing, and that's where guys really slow down and you start to see mistakes. But if he's ready to go, if he tests that knee and everything's fine and it's clicking, I don't imagine we're going to see him running around a bunch anymore. But I think he'll get it figured out pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, we both know this, that the best quarterbacks are the best distributors of the ball, right? And so I think he can do that. And I think with him, if he has this, if it clicks 1 or 2 games or just a quick play, it just clicks, and I think he can kind of snowball in a good way from there. Big time fans. Well, me and you will both be rooting for him. I'm going to go ahead and talk about 2 other guys real quick, kind of in the underrated category. That's Malik Cunningham, who had a great year in 2019 for Louisville. And then last year in 2020 had a down year. So in 2019 had 22 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. 2020 had 22 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. And you saw his yards per attempt go down by 3. So just struggled, right? And so I think you saw the talent there in 2019, even though he struggled in 2020. I'm going to give him kind of a sophomore slump, if you will, even though he's not a sophomore, and just expect him to come back, have a better year. And then a guy like Brennan Armstrong from Virginia, just that program in general just gets kind of flown under the radar. Coach Mendenhall always has him playing tough. But he's the guy who, left-handed quarterback, had 18 passing touchdowns, 11 picks, but had over 500 yards rushing too. So a sneaky good athlete who I think could find Virginia right there in that 7-8 wins kind of column again because of Brennan Armstrong. So
yeah.
Again, all these guys hit, even just the 4 guys that we talked about just back and forth hit, then you got 8 solid quarterbacks, and that's going to put you in one of the, if you're not the best quarterback conference in college football, you are right up there number 2 maybe. If all those guys hit, then you have more than half your guys are dudes, man. Well, we covered a lot of stuff. Is there anything else we missed? You want to dive into any other ACC kind of QB content or?
The only other guy, Kenny Pickett at Pitt, I think he's a 5th-year player, right? Not just a 5th-year senior, but he's played a lot of football for Pitt. Pat Narduzzi loves him, speaks really highly of him, says he's one of his favorite quarterbacks he's ever coached. He's got potential. He's talented enough, right? He's not a generational talent. He doesn't have Sam Howell or DJ talent. But you play that much football and you start that many games, I think there's a potential to have a special season. I would touch on him. There's still a few teams that, Duke really struggled last year at the QB position. That's going to be, okay, show me situation. Syracuse, same thing. NC State, same thing. The names and the guys that are in those positions right now, I think it's going to be, you got to have a pretty major step forward from last year. So those are all going to be wait and sees for me.
Yeah, and the guys you mentioned, like, they actually do have potential. With Garrett Schrader transferring to Mississippi State, if he wins a job at Syracuse, and then Devin Leary at NC State, and Braxton Burmeister has thrown some good things at Bud Tech. So it's an interesting conference to keep up with quarterback-wise, dude. But, man, that was fun. Taylor, thank you again for your time. Let's tell everyone where they can find you. I know your Twitter handle, but, I don't know that stuff. So.
Yeah, man, Twitter, T Mccard 16, MCHARGUE. And, this is fun. I think, we'll keep this rolling. We got a few other conferences to go. We'll do some group of 5 stuff also. And then we'll figure out something for the fall. We've bounced around a couple ideas, but we'll figure out, maybe it's a review and recap of QB performances from the week before. So, looking forward to next week.
Absolutely. And guys, let us know if y'all want us to touch on any other topics or any quarterback stuff in general. That's kind of all we do and talk about when we text you at the weekend. Also, make sure y'all be watching ESPN so y'all can watch Taylor call these games. Okay, I'm going to give y'all the schedule so y'all can watch him call these games. But until next time, we'll see y'all guys. Remember to like, subscribe if you into that YouTube stuff, and we'll see you next time.